In this video, I want to go over why foundations are so dangerous and the connection I think that they have back to the censorship that's going on. You see, from my point of view, foundations, like the Open Society Foundation, which is George Soros's foundation, the Clinton Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, Ford Foundation, Carnegie Foundation, the Kellogg Foundation, the Trudeau Foundation, the Clinton Foundation, there's hundreds, if not thousands of these foundations, which are presenting a real danger to our democracy and our economy. Because it's my argument that they are creating almost a closed loop. They are creating a parallel society, a parallel economy, where they all feed off of each other. They reinforce each other's ideals and ideologies. And in the meantime, they're surviving on the backs of the taxpayers of the productive nations. Let's start by looking at a report called What's Next for Philanthropy. This was written in 2010. And it's kind of interesting. It was commissioned by, I believe, a company called Deloitte Touche. Deloitte is the world's largest firm. And supposedly what it does is gives taxation advice, tax advice, accounting, and consultancy. Everybody always wonders, what do you mean you're a consultant? A consultant on what, right? Well, Deloitte's consultancy business is the fastest and largest growing segment of its business. And like I said, it's the world's largest firm. It commissioned this study called What's Next for Philanthropy. Of course, it didn't do so alone. These guys never act on their own. It also did so with support of the Kellogg Foundation and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, two huge American-based foundations. It was done in 2010, and let's just look at a couple of things that it says in the report. Acting bigger. The landscape of private actors working for public good expanded quickly over the past decade despite two financial downturns. Just look at this one statistic. This is from between 2007 and 2008. More than 8 new U.S. foundations and more than 160 nonprofits were created every day. This growth, of course, they say, is also global, and a new cadre of impact investors working hard for social change in every region on the planet. I think when most people think of foundations, they imagine these foundations are giving scholarships, that they are helping the local arts community, maybe, a symphony orchestra, they endow them. They might help hospitals. They might try to help the homeless situation in their neighborhoods or get school books to children. But that is far from the reality. There are many smaller foundations that are doing things like that, but these large ones that are started by multinational corporations and some very wealthy figures, they're far more interested in social engineering, and a lot of their money, maybe most, maybe all at this point of their money, goes outside of the countries in which they are incorporated. New data and tools, the means to make it easier to change. Look at this bizarre statement. We have long believed that the new connective technologies are the Trojan horse of change in philanthropy and the social sector as a whole. Well, why would they say that? We know what a Trojan horse is, right? It looks like a gift, and the person accepts the gift, and inside the gift is the seeds of that person's demise. The enemies are hiding their true intentions inside of a gift. So it struck me really odd that this report would call connective technologies the Trojan horse of philanthropy. And yet, when I go further and research foundations and how they're growing and what they're doing, their whole business model is based on connective technology. So are they admitting that this is the way they get to enact their nefarious plans, is through the connective technologies? I can't find what else they might mean by that. And this next part belies their motive, I believe. The challenge is to build tools that make it easier for people to do the right things and harder to do the wrong things. We have a better shot at getting people to change their behavior, especially if there are new incentives to do so. What incentive do people in institutions have to change given barriers to transformation? We have consulted many experts on this subject, none more persuasive than organizational theorist Edgar Schein. He argues that the only time organizations learn and change is when the normal level of learning anxiety, which is the anxiety produced by having to shift and learn something new, is trumped by survival anxiety, the anxiety produced upon realizing that if something doesn't change, they will not survive. Far from giving an endowment to a symphony orchestra, what's next for philanthropy appears to be scaring people into changing their behavior. That report says straight up that they have to induce a state of survival anxiety in people to get them to change their behavior. This is the new face of philanthropy, according to a study commissioned by two of the world's largest foundations and the world's largest firm that is growing by leaps and bounds in its consultancy business. Consulting for what? Possibly for foundations. Some examples of how they have decided to use this technique. The UN issues dire warning on climate change. That was in October this year. Do you remember that? They said they had 10 years. We only have 10 years left to survive if we don't give hundreds of billions of dollars to the UN. And this one that they did in May 2017 has a double whammy. They're scaring people about serious economic trouble for the UK if they don't accept more migration. And they're saying it's all about Brexit. Brexit caused this, so you should be scared of Brexit. What did Brexit cause? Less migration. So you should be scared of less migration. 2-in-1 headline. Nice job, guys. Nice job with your survival anxiety. But what I want to focus on going forward here is the censorship, the deplatforming, the banning, the survival anxiety that certain groups, certain corporations are engaged in by making an example of figures who speak out against the globalist agenda, such as Sargon of Akkad, Robert Spencer, David Horowitz, Laura Loomer, Faith Goldy, Alex Jones. There's a long list of people. I'm sorry if I missed your favorite one that are being kicked off of payment platforms. Essentially, in the deep background, banks are saying that if you say things we don't like, we're going to take away your ability to make a living. If that's not survival anxiety inducing, I don't know what is. So we'll just look at a couple of examples here. This was from back in August 2017. Big headlines about this. PayPal, GoFundMe, and Patreon banned a bunch of people. This loser says they're associated with the alt-right. Alt-right is just code for people speaking out against the globalist agenda 99% of the time. I mean, sometimes, yes, those people are on the alt-right. And quite frankly, whether or not I agree with the people on the alt-right, it's just speech. We are into censorship. Banks, payment processor services are into censorship now, and they're hiding it behind a facade of philanthropy, doing the right thing. It's a ruse. Most of us know that. Here's the article about Alex Jones getting banned from PayPal. Here's about Robert Spencer getting banned. MasterCard, that's the first time their name comes up. Now MasterCard blocks David Horowitz. They banned ASMR people for some reason. And like I said, Sargon of Akkad. But they also cut off the ability to use the platform for Gab, which is an alternative to Twitter. And then, in response to all these bannings, when another company came up called Subscribestar, it itself got booted from PayPal. This again ties back to the payment processors, which is MasterCard. Visa too, but MasterCard is the big one. Now you might say, MasterCard is a private company. It has every right to do that. But we're talking about banking here. Banking is a key to survival, like it or not. We can't just become hunter-gatherers within an urban society. We need access to the bank. We need to be able to make an income. And this is producing a survival anxiety threat in people. Not only, of course, in the people they ban, but in everybody watching. I better not say XYZ because they might ban me too. And how far will it go? But just to show you right here, just to leave no room to doubt here about these two entities working together, PayPal and MasterCard, he's got a screen grab here, expand partnership, and that is from September 2016. If you want to know more about this, Nick Monroe on Twitter has done excellent research. I will link to this Twitter moment. It'll be the top item in the references section of the description box. How far are they going to go with this? We were all just told that countries that sign the UN Global Compact on Migration will be signing onto a clause in which they are prohibited from criticizing migration. Whether or not it actually becomes a criminal offense is almost irrelevant. If people already know that something like MasterCard and Visa will just revoke their ability to use the services. Because this isn't going to be confined to just online commentators or alternative researchers. This could affect anybody. Why would MasterCard stop at bloggers or vloggers? Why wouldn't they just revoke your credit card if you are caught somewhere online criticizing migration? All of this led me to want to research MasterCard, and the first thing I asked myself was, is there a main guy or woman? Is there somebody out there that owns MasterCard? And I Googled it, and I got an exact answer. You'll never guess who owns more of MasterCard than anywhere else. This is a real article from 2014 in the Motley Fool. It isn't exactly the company MasterCard, but in fact the MasterCard Foundation that owns nearly 10.5% of the company, or a staggering 120 million shares. I'm not an accountant, and I don't pretend to know all of the ins and outs here, but on the surface, this looks like a super genius plan that MasterCard pulled off, because there's all manner of tax avoidance built in to the company going public and gifting its foundation a huge percentage of the shares. What it looks like has happened is the MasterCard Foundation is basically its R&D department now. MasterCard gets to have an off-the-books, so to speak, R&D department, which also buys it good PR and allows it to operate outside of the normal regulatory scrutiny. Foundations are very opaque. There's very few reporting requirements. No matter where they incorporate, there's very few reporting requirements. And what it looks to me like MasterCard is mainly doing is it is carrying out wide social experiments with microfinance and digital IDs for people, cashless society stuff in Africa. But we'll talk a little bit more about that later. What have I got next for you? This is from Canada. The MasterCard Foundation is the largest foundation in Canada at $12.7 billion. And when you look at the disbursements, the MasterCard Foundation is the largest, but the second largest is this Joyce Family Foundation. Let's look again over here. Nope, they're not even listed in the top wealthiest foundations. The more you dig in this, the more you look, you realize that there are people who genuinely use their foundations for good. And then there are the corporate foundations. And of course, the perpetual globalist foundations like the Rockefeller Foundation and the total scam artists from the get-go like the Clinton Foundation. Yeah, the MasterCard Foundation set up in Canada because of our super generous tax scheme, and the rules for those taxes and also for reporting and transparency have just gotten more lax in Canada. So look for more of this. What you might be saying to yourself at this point is, you don't want to end philanthropy. Philanthropy is good. Why would you want to harsh on foundations? They're progressive. They're, they fill in the gaps of where government can't do certain things. This is what foundations are good for. Well, I just want you to listen to this 2-minute clip from an expert on this, speaking to the Aspen Institute.
An investigative journalist named Mark Dowie spent time with people in the orbit of George Soros as he began to set up the array of philanthropic entities that are now called the Open Society Institute. And the typical way I think a foundation gets started these days, and for the past generation, has been an initial donor decides to hire a staff of people to help run the foundation. The staff initially tries to decide what the program areas are going to be, the main efforts that the grant making will be devoted to, and then they open up shop, as it were, defining their interests and being transparent about that to other people to apply for grants. So at the tail end of this planning process, Mark Dowie relates the following episode where there was a final discussion, including George Soros and other people, about what the program areas were that they should devote themselves to. So there was evidently a disagreement around the table. And at one point, George Soros is alleged to have pounded his fist on the table and said something to the effect of, well, at the end of the day, this is my money, so we're going to do it my way. At which point, a program staff person interjected gently that, excuse me, Mr. Soros, roughly half of the money in the foundation would have been in the US Treasury if you hadn't put it in the foundation. So perhaps other people should have a say, too. He allegedly was fired the following week. No surprise there. And the idea here is that although many people construe philanthropy of any size as simply the exercise of the liberty of an individual to give away her money or property as she sees fit, given the array of tax benefits that attach to philanthropic activity, it's, I think, more accurate to describe philanthropy as the tax-subsidized exercise of liberty.
Right. If these foundations weren't set up, 50%, roughly, of the money that's in them would go into the tax coffers of the governments where they operate, where they are set up. And mostly these foundations are actually set up and incorporated and have their offices in first world countries, Canada, the United States, England, etc. But all the money that they give out, it goes offshore. These guys aren't funding symphony orchestras or hospitals in your local areas. They're doing experimentation and building third-party connections outside of the Western world, for the most part. Let's have a look at some of that. Here's one of the home pages of the MasterCard Foundation. Imagining a world where everyone has the opportunity to learn and prosper. Tackling the Youth Employment Challenge in Africa. The MasterCard Foundation and Education for Employment celebrate success of the Al Morad project in Morocco. EFE, that's Education for Employment. They're talking about educating youth over in Morocco. This is a big thing for the MasterCard Foundation. They've got a whole bunch of different campuses, actually, not just Morocco. But I thought I'd pick Morocco and just see, like, what are they talking about here? The chairman of the EFE in Morocco is this guy, Ibrahim Slaoui. What does he do? He's chairman and managing director of Mafouder, a Moroccan metal casting company which exports worldwide. He's an entrepreneur and has established several businesses. Blah, blah, blah. What it looks like is happening is MasterCard, in partnership with this other foundation, is training the youth to work at this guy's metal fabrication and other businesses. It almost is like the first world is paying the salaries for this guy to operate his businesses. I don't know, because these things are very opaque, but that could literally be happening. In fact, who's to say this guy is even the owner of anything? What if MasterCard had this business, this metal fabricating business, and it didn't want to report that? It can just do this through the foundation. I am not alleging that that's what's happening, but that could happen under the structure. Who's going to audit that? Who's going to know? It's totally opaque, and they put this veneer of do-gooder on it. Has anybody checked the working conditions at that factory? I wonder. What else does MasterCard get up to? Well, see this boardingschools.com? The MasterCard Foundation pays for some of these things for African students. University World News here. High youth unemployment is one of the most pressing issues facing the world. The MasterCard Foundation is launching a major new initiative to promote greater job opportunities for young people in Africa. This is the American University of Beirut. We are fortunate to have institutional funding from the U.S. government as well as the MasterCard Foundation. This is University of British Columbia. MasterCard Foundation Scholars Program, a comprehensive scholarship to students from sub-Saharan Africa. Fully funded MasterCard Foundation Scholars Program, 2018, Michigan State University. Listen to this. They get travel costs, visa and service fees, tuition and other MSU fees, housing, food, and living expenses, health insurance. That's what MasterCard is providing to students from sub-Saharan Africa. How many MasterCard scholarships are being offered to American citizens? Zero. I thought this was a nice touch. Program scholars are also provided with a laptop and backpack. Literally everything they need. And I'm not showing you a complete list. This goes on and on. There's all kinds of universities involved in this, and all the students are coming from sub-Saharan Africa. These foundations literally taking our tax base and decimating it by transferring their corporate wealth into foundations, thereby avoiding 50% tax, roughly, all to enrich people outside of our countries. And in the meantime, they are building these partnerships with other NGOs, supposedly, and other foundations that are supposedly helping youth, but we can never check on this. And it just so happens that the people that are involved in these other foundations in Africa own businesses and need employees. And it just gets worse. The MasterCard Foundation says it's one of its main expenses, or one of its main areas of disbursements is into education. But they mean girls' education, and they mean girls' education in Africa. One of the organizations they work with is this CamFed. I can't really find what CamFed does. It looks like it provides a little bit of teacher training and some mentoring. Just to give you an idea, CamFed is a big and successful NGO. Look at all these partners. And here's another one that's very, very similar to CamFed. It's called Child and Youth Finance International. This is to introduce African youth to financial literacy, they say. But you go to the website and none of these stats are clickable. They provide no backup for their numbers. And their initiative mainly consists of two things: an awards ceremony and this Global Money Week. If you look into Global Money Week, all it is organizations say they talk about money for a week, and then they send this website their pictures, and the website puts the pictures up. I don't even think they do anything. It doesn't look like they do anything except maintain a website and give out these awards, allegedly. Their donors and partner foundations have a lot of the usual suspects. There's MasterCard, of course. Microinvest is Soros. The actual company MasterCard, KPMG, Credit Suisse, Deloitte. I mean, we know about Deloitte. And here's the European Union and the European Parliament are involved in this one. Here's an interesting thing. One of their featured supporters is Aflatoon. Here's Aflatoon here. It turns out Aflatoon is exactly the same as Child and Youth Finance International. It does the same thing that one does. And it's run by the same person. This woman here, Jiru Bilimoria. She supposedly got the foundation bug back in India and started Aflatoon, Child and Youth Finance International, and Child Helpline International. She must be a big deal because she got a royal honor from the King of the Netherlands by being appointed Officer of the Order of the Orange Nassau in 2018. And yet, honestly, go look at these sites. Besides producing a handbook, which is supposed to help teachers talk to kids between 6 and 18 about financial literacy, they don't do anything else. And who are their partners? We've got Citi Foundation, Skoll again, MasterCard Foundation again, Ernst & Young, KLM, Google, Citi, Open Society Initiative, Clinton Global Initiative, McKinsey and Company. And of course, all the rest that are listed there that I didn't bother to mention because they don't necessarily have relevance to what I'm talking about today. But it's mind-boggling. These are huge money organizations, very big foundations, and they're all giving money to an organization that basically produces a handbook and runs 2 websites. And interestingly also, its address, Child and Youth Finance International, has as its address a P.O. box in the Netherlands. And so does Aflatoon, a P.O. box, a different one, in the Netherlands. It has no office? Does it not want to be found? Why aren't its materials available on its website? Why can't I download this handbook? Isn't it interested in spreading financial literacy? And isn't it a nonprofit? So many questions. And you think of something like this huge multi-billion-dollar organization like the MasterCard Foundation, $12.7 billion. And it chooses to partner with that organization, of all things. But don't worry. It also partners with other super wealthy foundations like the Gates Foundation. Why the Gates Foundation is funding a MasterCard lab, that was back in 2014. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is funding the first 3 years of the MasterCard Labs for Financial Inclusion in Kenya with $11 million and has offered another $8 million to help commercialize any products or services the lab develops. This guy, Walt McKinney, he is their chairman of inclusion at the MasterCard Foundation. Listen to what he says. "The world has changed," he added, "as the lines between profit-making corporations, nonprofits, and governments blur." I'll say. It is certainly getting to the point where who is in control here? Who are our real masters? MasterCard or the people we elect? Our government's just a joke and a waste of money at this point. How do we get our tax money out of the hands of these corporations who are shipping it all offshore to conduct God knows what business, really? You know, this is getting pretty long, and maybe the amount of information I've gone over is a bit overwhelming. So I think I'll leave it here for today, and I'll come back and I'll do a part 2 tomorrow or the next day, in which I'll talk about the history of foundations, and I want to show you the great irony that happened. Back in the day, Rockefeller was the first guy that wanted to set up a foundation in the United States, and he met a lot of opposition. I want to show you who opposed him and what they said, because it's really eye-opening. I'll also go over some other interesting connections that I found that, you know, I think illustrate this theory that I have, that there's a parallel society working right alongside of ours, which is these very wealthy foundations, these NGOs, these endowment funds, these pension funds, that really do serve to drain the system in which they operate. They're very much a bunch of super wealthy parasites that all go around clinking their glasses and slapping each other on the back and laughing all the way to the bank. But for the end of this video, I'll leave this little note of hope. This is from January 25th, 2018. Attorneys on new tax law. Nonprofits don't know what's hit them yet. Apparently, under Trump's new tax regime, there will be a 21% excise tax on the amount of compensation over $1 million a year that is awarded to the organization's top 5 executive salaries. And by the way, if you read that article, you'll see it doesn't just apply to the top 5. Anybody else will be subject to it as well. Already, the consultants are busy trying to figure out how to avoid that 21% tax. And maybe they'll be successful, but to me it's a little bit of a hopeful sign saying Trump at least knows this is something that he needs to tackle. This does pose an existential threat to a country's economy and therefore the health of the whole country. This siphoning off of wealth, this parallel society, this closed loop network that these very wealthy individuals and huge monolithic corporations have built and exist within, yeah, it needs to be stopped. So I'll see you again for part 2 of this look into foundations as soon as I can. Until then, please like the video if you liked it. Leave me a comment, share the video, and subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. Peace out.